The new mill at Cairnsford ran for 11 months before Ansel Roode walked into the office and told the owner that the building was going to blow up and kill everyone in it. And he told him it would happen on a dry winter day with the wind out of the northwest. And he was wrong about the wind and right about everything else. I was the owner. My name is Josiah Fenn, and I put up that mill with my brother's money and my own name over the door. And I am the man who listened to Ansel Roode about 4 months later than I should have. 4 months. I have had 30 years to think about those 4 months, and I have not yet found the bottom of them. He came to us in the fall of 1882, a man of about 50, with big, scarred hands, looking for work as a millwright, and he had papers and references, and one enormous gap in his history that he did not explain, and that I did not ask about, because good millwrights were scarce, and I was busy. I hired him to keep the machinery, and he was the best mechanic I ever employed, and within a month he was the most disliked man in that building. You have to understand what a flour mill was in that country in those years, because if you have only ever seen a picture of one, you will imagine something wrong. Cairnsford's mill was the biggest thing for 40 miles. 5 stories of frame and timber standing over the river, and it was not a quaint place with a water wheel and a man in a white apron. It was a factory. It ran on rollers and belts and elevators, chains of buckets running up inside wooden legs from the basement to the top floor, carrying grain up and flour down. And it ran day and night in the season, with 30 men in it, and it made a noise you could feel in your back teeth from the road. And it made dust. That is the whole of this story, and it took the milling industry of this country the better part of a century and several hundred dead men to learn it, so I do not offer my own slowness as anything unusual. Flour dust, not smoke, not gas, not anything that announces itself as a danger. Fine pale dust, the same substance as the bread on your table, hanging in the air of every mill that ever ran, and lying on every beam and ledge and rafter in the building, sifting down through the floors, gray-white on everything, in your hair and your clothes and your food. Every miller in the world worked in it and breathed it and thought about it exactly as much as a farmer thinks about chaff, which is to say that it was a nuisance to sweep, and no more. Ansel Roode had a different opinion about flour dust, and he made it known in his first week, and the men laughed at him, and I want to set down honestly what he actually said and how it sounded, because it sounded insane. He said that flour dust would explode. Not burn, explode, like powder, like a magazine, and that a mill full of hanging dust with a spark in it would go up all at once from top to bottom and take the building and every man in it. He said the dust lying on the beams was worse than the dust in the air, because the first small blast would shake the beams and throw all that settled dust up into the air at once and give the fire a second and far bigger charge to burn, and that this second one was the killer. He said it as calmly as a man tells you a belt is worn. Now, I want you to try to hear that the way we heard it in 1882. Flour is what you make bread out of. It is not an explosive. There was not a man in that building who had not spent his whole working life inside a cloud of the stuff, smoking his pipe on the stairs, and nothing had ever happened to any of them. The thing Ansel Roode was telling us contradicted the direct daily experience of every man there for their entire lives. When a man tells you that the ordinary substance you have handled for 30 years is a bomb, your mind does not weigh the argument. It classifies the speaker. We classified him. Within a month, he was Dusty Roode, and men would make a show of blowing dust off a beam when he came up the stairs, and one of the young ones, a boy named Peel, used to hold his match up in the air and look around with big eyes before he lit his pipe, and everybody laughed, and Ansel Roode never once laughed and never once got angry. And that steadiness of his made it worse, because a man who will not be provoked and will not shut up is very hard to be around. Here is the thing about him that everyone in that mill noticed and nobody thought about, and it is the thing I think about most now. Ansel Roode would not stand under a run of overhead shafting. Anywhere in that building, when he had to talk to a man, or wait, or think, he would position himself off to the side of the line shafts and the belt runs, against a wall, in a doorway, at the head of a stair, never underneath. He did it without appearing to think about it, the way a man steps around a puddle. The men noticed it, because in a mill you are under shafting most of the time, and it takes a deliberate effort to be somewhere else. And they decided it was more of his nervousness, another piece of Dusty Roode being afraid of the building. One of them asked him about it once, jeering a little, and he said only that he liked to know where the door was. That was all he ever said about it in 11 months. What he was doing, though none of us understood it until afterward, was standing where a man might live. He came to me formally in November, and this is the part where I have to give my own account and not spare myself. He came into the office on a Tuesday morning with his hat in his hands and asked for a half hour, and he laid out on my desk a list. It was written badly in pencil by a man who did not write much. It had 11 items on it. I have that piece of paper still. I have had it in the same drawer for 30 years, and I take it out perhaps twice a year and read it and put it back. The list was this: clean the beams and the ledges and the tops of the machines, all of them, every week, not when they look bad. Take down the wooden elevator legs on the north side and rebuild them in metal with proper covers. Put relief panels in the outside walls of the head house so that a blast would blow outward instead of lifting the floors. Stop the men smoking anywhere in the building, including the basement and the loading dock, and enforce it by discharge. Change the belt on the middle floor line shaft, which was slipping and running hot and throwing a smell. Ground the metal spouting so it would not throw a spark. Screen the grain going into the first break so that a tramp nail or a stone would not go through the rollers. Keep a barrel of water and 2 buckets on each floor. Put a second stair on the outside of the building, from the top floor to the ground. Fix the door on the east side of the 3rd floor, which was warped and would not open. And keep the mill damper in winter. Wet the floors. Do not let the air get as dry as it got. 11 things. I want to be plain about what happened next, because it is the reason I am telling this at all. I did not throw him out. I did not laugh at him. I did 4 of the 11. I did the ones that were cheap. I fixed the warped door because a warped door is an obvious thing. I put the water barrels on the floors. I changed the hot belt because he was right that it stank. And I told the men to stop smoking inside, which they did for about 3 weeks, and then did not. And I knew they did not. And I did not discharge anybody over it, because it was the busy season, and I could not spare a hand. The 7 I did not do were the 7 that cost money. Rebuilding the elevator legs in metal was $400. The outside stair was $90. The relief panels were an idea so strange to me that I could not even picture what he meant. A wall built deliberately weak so it would fall down. The weekly cleaning of the beams was the one that seems most insane to me now, because it cost nothing but 2 men's time on a Sunday, and I did not do it. And the reason I did not do it was that we were running full, and I could not see the point of paying 2 men to sweep a rafter nobody looks at. He asked me again in December, and again in January. In February, he asked me a 4th time, and I lost my temper, which I had not done before, and told him that if he was so certain the building would kill him, he was free to work somewhere else. And Ansel Roode, standing in my office with his hat in his hands again, said, "I have worked somewhere else, Mr. Fenn." And then he told me where he had been on the 2nd of May, 1878. I want to give an account of those 11 months, because the explosion takes 4 sentences to tell, and the 11 months are the actual story. And nobody ever wants to hear them. Nothing happens in them. That is the point. In September, he asked me for the Sunday cleaning crew, and I said we would look at it when the run slowed down. That was not a lie when I said it. The run did not slow down. In October, the miller on the 2nd floor, a good man named Corwin, came to me privately and said that Roode was upsetting the younger hands with his talk, and asked if I would speak to him. I did speak to him. I told him to keep the safety talk between himself and me, and not to worry the boys with it. He said, "Mr. Fenn, if I only tell you, then only you know." And I told him that was the arrangement. I have thought about that exchange more than almost any other. I did not silence him because I thought he was wrong. I silenced him because his being right in public would have been bad for the mood of the building. In November came the list. I have already told what I did with it. In December, we had our first real freeze, and the air in that building went as dry as a kiln. And Roode came to me and said the dust was hanging longer in the dry air, that he could see it in a lamp beam standing in the air for a full minute, where in September it would have settled, and he asked me to wet the floors. I told him wet floors in December meant ice on the stairs and a man with a broken leg, and I was not wrong about that. And I did not do anything else instead either, which is where the wrongness was. In January, the boy Peel started the business with the match. I laughed at it. I want that on the record. The owner of the building laughed at the joke, once, in front of the men, and after the owner laughs at a thing, there is no more discussing it seriously in that building. And I knew that when I laughed, and I laughed anyway, because it was funny, and because I was tired of the subject. In February, I lost my temper, and he told me about the Washburn. And in the 4 weeks after that, having heard it, do you know what I actually did? I priced the elevator legs. That is the truth. I wrote to a firm in Chicago and got a figure, and the figure was $410. And I put the letter in the drawer with the list, and I intended to do it in the summer when the season was over. I want to be very clear that I was not refusing. In my own mind, that whole winter, I was not a man refusing to make his mill safe. I was a man who was going to make his mill safe at a more convenient time. Every man who has ever presided over a preventable disaster has been in that exact chair, and he did not feel like a villain in it either. There is one more thing from those months, and it is the worst of them. In the first week of March, 2 weeks before, Roode asked me for one thing. Not the list, one thing. He asked me to have the mill swept down, top to bottom, beams and all, before we started the spring run. And he offered to do it himself, on his own time, on the 2 Sundays remaining, if I would let him have one other man to hold the ladders. 1 man for 2 Sundays. That is what he asked me for, on the 6th of March, 1883. I told him I would let him know. The Washburn A Mill in Minneapolis was the largest flour mill in the world, and at about 7 in the evening on the 2nd of May, 1878, it exploded. It did not burn down, it exploded, and the explosion was heard 10 miles away, and the roof of that enormous stone building went up into the air in one piece, people said, before it came apart, and the walls fell outward, and the fire that followed took 2 more mills and several other buildings with it, and it killed 18 men. 14 of them were in the Washburn, and 4 were in the buildings the fire spread to, and there was not enough left of some of them to bury. Nobody at the time knew why it had happened. There was no boiler in the part of the mill where it started, no lamp, nothing that anybody could point to. It was investigated at length, and the investigation concluded what a few millwrights had been saying for years and nobody had believed, that a set of millstones had run dry or caught a foreign object and thrown a spark into the dust-filled air, and the dust had done the rest. Ansel Roode had been a millwright at the Washburn A. He was in the yard when it went, on an errand, 20 feet outside the door, and he was thrown across the yard, and he lived. The man he had been talking to a minute earlier did not. He told me this in my office in February of 1883, in about 6 sentences, without any drama. And then he put his hat back on and went back to work. And I did nothing. That is the thing I have to say plainly. I heard the account of the largest industrial explosion this country had yet seen from a man who had been standing outside the door of it, and I still did not spend $400 on elevator legs. And I still did not put 2 men on the rafters on a Sunday. I've spent 30 years trying to explain that to myself. The nearest I can get is this. When he told me about the Washburn, my mind did not do what you would expect. It did not think, this man knows. It thought, this poor devil was in a terrible accident, and it has marked him. I converted his knowledge into his damage. His having survived it was the very thing that let me set it aside, because it explained him. And once a man is explained, you do not have to be persuaded by him. That is the whole mechanism. That is how it works, every time, in every business and every town. A man tells you the truth and gives you his credential for knowing it, and you take the credential as the reason he says it, and you file the whole thing under his personality, and you go back to work. The 18th of March, 1883, was a Sunday, and there were 9 men in the mill, which was a mercy that I have never been able to feel as one. We were not running. That is why it was 9 men and not 30. We were doing repairs, which is what you do on a Sunday, and the mill was quiet, and the reason there was dust in the air at all was that 4 of the men were working on the 2nd floor conveyor and had opened it up. I was in the office on the ground floor at the north end. Ansel Roode was on the 3rd floor. Peel, who was 22 and who used to make the joke with the match, was on the 2nd floor with the conveyor crew. What happened, as near as anybody could reconstruct it, was that a bearing on the middle floor line shaft, the same shaft whose belt Roode had made me change a year before, ran hot enough to char the wood of its housing. It smoldered for some minutes, then the housing let go, and the shaft threw the burning material outward into an air that 4 men had just filled with dust from an open conveyor. There was a noise like a large door slamming somewhere below me, and the floor of my office lifted about 2 inches and dropped back, and every window on the north side of the building went out into the yard, and then, in the pause afterward, while I stood there stupidly with my pen in my hand, I heard the sound I still hear, which was the whole building shuddering, as all that settled dust came off every beam and rafter and ledge in the place, exactly as he had said it would, and hung there in the air, waiting. And then the mill blew up. The second blast took the top 3 floors. The head house went up and outward, and the roof came apart in the air and came down across the yard and into the river. The east wall of the 4th floor fell into the mill race. What was left standing was the ground floor and part of the 2nd, and my office, which was at the north end and had a doorway I was standing in, which is why I am able to write this. 5 of the 9 men in that building died. I am going to name them, because the mill did not have their names on anything afterward, and I put up a stone at my own expense, and I am not going to leave them out of the account now. Peel, Corwin, Anton Rice, Silas Boyd, and Hollis, whose first name I will not print because his family asked me not to, for reasons of their own that they were entitled to. 4 of us lived. 2 men on the ground floor at the south end walked out. I walked out of my doorway. And Ansel Roode came down what was left of the west stair from the 3rd floor, with his arm broken in 2 places and his face cut to pieces by glass. And he was standing at the head of that stair when it went, which is the only reason he was not killed, and he had been standing at the head of stairs and in doorways and out from under the shafting for 11 months, while men laughed at him for it. He was on his feet in the yard within a minute, with his arm hanging, organizing. He got the water going onto the wreck at the south end, where the fire was taking hold, and where 2 of the men were, and he got them out, and it was too late for both of them, and he knew it was too late, and did it anyway, because you do. Now I have to tell the part of this that is hardest, and I am going to be exact. Ansel Roode did not blame me. In 30 years, he never once said a word to me about the list, or the $400, or the Sundays. He worked for me afterward for another 9 years until his hands got too bad. He was at my table at Christmas. He carried my daughter on his shoulders, and I would rather he had cursed me. I want that understood by anyone hearing this who is in a position to be told something they do not want to hear. His silence was not kindness to me, or it was kindness, and it was also the worst thing anyone has ever done to me, because it left the whole weight of it in my hands, with nowhere to put it down. If he had raged at me, I could have accepted the rage and been forgiven and gotten up. He never gave me the chance. He just came back to work. I rebuilt the mill in 1884. I built it to the list, all 11 items, and about 20 more that Roode and I worked out together over that winter, sitting at a table with the same pencil-written paper between us that had been in my drawer for a year. Metal elevator legs with covers. Relief panels in every outside wall of the head house, and I finally understood what he had meant, and it is a beautiful idea, that you build one wall of a building deliberately weak, so that when the pressure comes, it goes out through the wall you chose, instead of through the floors and the roof and the men. Exterior stairs on 2 sides. Dust collection, which was new then, and which I put in at very considerable expense. And a standing crew of 2 men, whose only job on a Sunday was to go over every beam and ledge and rafter in that building with brushes. The new mill ran 41 years. It never had a fire worse than a scorched bearing. And here is the thing that has come to matter to me more than my own mill. Every miller in 3 states came to look at that building. Some of them came to gawk at the man who had blown up his own mill and rebuilt it strange, and I let them gawk, and I walked every one of them through it, and I told them exactly what it had cost me in money, and told them the 5 names it had cost me. And by the end of the 1880s, there were a dozen mills in that part of the country, with relief panels in their walls, and metal legs on their elevators, and men sweeping their rafters on Sundays. I did not do that out of goodness. I did it because I could not stand it. Those are not the same thing, and I am not going to pretend otherwise at this late date. Ansel Roode died in 1899. He was 67. He is buried in Cairnsford, and on his stone, which I paid for and which his widow approved, it says his name and his dates, and then it says, "He told them," which some people have found peculiar, and which is the only epitaph I have ever thought was entirely accurate. What I have left to say is short. There is a particular kind of man who arrives in a place knowing something the place does not want to know, and he is almost never a comfortable person, because if he were comfortable about it, he would not keep saying it. He will be right and he will be tiresome, and those 2 facts have nothing to do with each other, and every one of us sorts him into the second category and thinks we have dealt with the first. I did it with a written list on my desk from a survivor of the largest explosion in the country. There is no cleverness that protects you from this. The only thing that protects you is a rule, made in advance and kept when it is inconvenient, that you do the cheap items on the list immediately, and you schedule the expensive ones with a date on them, and that you never, ever allow yourself to decide a warning is really a symptom of the man delivering it. 2 men sweeping rafters on a Sunday. That is what it was. Between 5 men living and 5 men dead, at the bottom of everything, there was a Sunday and 2 men with brushes, and I would not spend it. Now, Cairnsford and its people are ours, but here is what is true. Combustible dust explosions are real, and flour dust is one of the most dangerous dust hazards there is. Any fine organic dust suspended in air in sufficient concentration will, given an ignition source, burn so fast that it constitutes an explosion. The double blast mechanism described here is the genuine and characteristic killer, and it is why these disasters destroy whole buildings. A small primary explosion shakes accumulated dust off beams and surfaces into the air, and that far larger suspended cloud detonates as a secondary explosion. The Washburn A Mill disaster in Minneapolis on the 2nd of May, 1878, is real. It destroyed the largest flour mill in the world, killed 18 men, and led directly to major reforms in mill design and ventilation. Explosion relief panels, enclosed metal conveying equipment, rigorous housekeeping to prevent dust accumulation, ignition source control, and dust collection are the real, established, and still current defenses. And combustible dust remains a serious industrial hazard to this day in grain elevators, mills, sugar refineries, and woodworking plants. This story involves an industrial disaster and the deaths of workers, and if that is difficult for you, please be gentle with yourself in the hearing of it. The people are imagined. The dust, the 2 blasts, and the fact that housekeeping is the whole of the defense are exactly as they were.